Most of our metro now under a mandatory mask order. Will you wear one? And what happens if you don't?
No mask, no service.
As a private property owner and business, I will not be telling a grown adult what they can and cannot put on their face.
Plus, it's official. The Nichols name stripped. Is our 7th president next? Plus, heading to 100.
Ask them if they heard anything or saw anything.
Kansas City's less talked about crisis. And how much clout does a football team have? The campus clash that's testing the limits of free speech.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nick Haynes. It is one big news development after another. Who can keep up? We track the stories and trends that are impacting us right here where we live. Checking in with us this week from Fox 4 News reporter Shannon O'Brien, the managing editor of the Call newspaper, Eric Wesson, from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling, and from KCWIR News, Steve Kraske. Starting now, masks are now mandatory throughout most of our metro, and that includes the entire state of Kansas, though some counties pushing back, including in Johnson County.
COVID-19 is still in our communities, and it is still spreading. Wearing a mask is not only safe, but it is necessary to avoid another shutdown.
For the most part, face masks are now required anytime you go into an indoor public space, whether that's grocery shopping or visiting a hardware store. These latest public health restrictions set off a new round, though, of confusion and questions. The city getting inundated with calls and emails from business owners and citizens about who should and shouldn't be wearing them. Are you required to wear them while working out at the gym, for instance? And what are the consequences for not wearing one? Shannon O'Brien, are the police going to arrest you?
Nick, there are not going to be masked police chasing people down the street they see without masks. How this is going to be enforced in most places is it's going to be the businesses are required to mandate that people who come to their business and people who work in their business are wearing masks. It's going to be a complaint-based system. So if somebody's somewhere and they see people not wearing masks, they can call in to the counties or the cities where that's happening, and the health department will take care of it. Those businesses could be talked to, there could be citations, but that's how this is going to work.
How did the public respond, Eric Wesson? Are there more people in our city wearing face masks now than there were this time last week?
I don't believe so. I think people have gotten real lax. It's not a top story in the news anymore. So I think a lot of people have kind of let it go and saying, hey, we're okay. We were at Ward Parkway yesterday and they opened a new restaurant. There was a standing room only line outside the door. It was very few people that had masks on.
What do you think, Steve, in your slice of the world as you move around our metro? Are there fewer people wearing masks today or more than there were last week?
Oh, Nick, I think there are a few more who are wearing masks. You know, I hear what Eric says, but to me, the virus is back being the #1 news story, not only in Kansas City, but across the country. It's simply dominating things right now. People are tired of it, but the numbers are what the numbers are right now, Nick.
Even with a statewide order in the state of Kansas, though, Dave Helling, a lot of counties pushing back, some saying they won't do it at all. It's interesting, in the metropolitan area, everyone was fast moving to put this mask policy in place this week. But Johnson County was nervous about doing the same thing. What is so different about Johnson County than all of the surrounding counties to it?
Well, the politics are different. I mean, the county commissioners who are most concerned about, in Johnson County, most concerned about any universal mask order are conservatives on the county commission. They want to make an issue of this. One of the things, Nick, I think we're going to have to get used to is this isn't going to go away in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I mean, I do think people are thinking, well, if I just wear my mask until the middle of July, this will all go away. The number of cases across the country are now actually higher than they were at the height of the coronavirus pandemic back in March and April. And so this is going to last for some time, probably through the end of July at the least. And then school starts, and we're going to have second graders with masks. I mean, I think our tough questions are ahead of us, not behind us. This is a skirmish. The real confrontation is still some weeks away.
But didn't we always know, though, Shannon, that the number of cases would be higher as we tested more people?
Yes, they did know the number of cases was going to be higher, but I think it's growing at a faster rate than they expected. And speaking of the Johnson County Commission, I think one of the things that people are concerned about on that commission is enforcement. How to enforce that across the county could be a problem.
Now, I mentioned the public reaction to all of this. One way the public responded was to send Mayor Quinton Lucas an incendiary message. You should swing from a tree, wrote one angry constituent irked by the mayor's mask policy. Did the mayor of Wyandotte County, David Alvey, receive the same message? Did Governor Laura Kelly, who also imposed a mandatory mask policy, also get one? Or were those words about swinging from a tree reserved solely for Quinton Lucas, Shannon?
Solely for Quinton Lucas. You know, I've spoken to him at length about what happened and the comments that he got and the threat that he got. And he says that he is a Black mayor who has made an unpopular decision. He believes the attack is because he is Black. And not only is he concerned about the comments that are being made to him, but if somebody is making those kind of racist statements and threats to him, what's happening out in the community to other people of color?
But one part of this component of this message was also that he was a mayor who was protesting in the streets without a mask, and that was different than what David Alvey was doing, or perhaps Governor Laura Kelly, Eric.
Yes. And he had a mask when he was out in the plaza area, when he was marching with the protesters. He had a mask on, but it just goes to show, even though we say that things are okay, racial divide is very great here in the Kansas City metropolitan area. So it's just par for the course. I saw him yesterday at one of the vigils. His security detail was around him pretty tough. So I guess he's weathering the storm.
You want to know why Black Lives Matter, why that movement is the force that it is today. It's for moments just like this.
Even Mayor Lucas told me that when he read it, it was heartbreaking to him.
How many issues move this fast? Just weeks after a City Parks Board member calls for the renaming of the J.C. Nichols Fountain, well, it's happened. The pioneering developer's name stripped from what is one of our city's most iconic landmarks, and in a unanimous decision, the Parks Board also voting to change the name J.C. Nichols Parkway to Mill Creek Parkway. That's what the road that skirts the east side of the plaza was called before Nichols' name was attached to it in 1952.
But the use of racially restrictive covenants led to segregated neighborhoods in Kansas City, which led to racial isolation and resulted, in my opinion, in severe concentration of poverty. This action is not about erasing history. It is about responding to history.
What I find amazing about this, Steve Kraske, is that when we had that whole dispute over the Paseo and changing it to Martin Luther King, it took weeks for those signs to come down, if not months, and then to be returned to the Paseo name after the public vote. Yet they took down the name, the plaque, within moments, it seemed, of that decision being made.
I think that's a very astute observation, Nick. You're so right. This has moved with lightning speed. And it goes to just what I said a few minutes ago, the power of this moment, the power of this Black Lives Matter push that we're seeing across the country and here in Kansas City. You know, I wrote my first columns about removing the name of J.C. Nichols from the fountain 3 years ago. Got a lot of response to it, but not much action. This moment, though, changed the politics of it very, very quickly.
So the J.C. Nichols Parkway gets a new name, Eric Wesson, but I never saw anything in this conversation about the renaming of the J.C. Nichols Fountain. It's just the fountain right now?
Yeah, it's just a fountain. I think they're going to come up with some names in the next couple of weeks and probably listen to some community input from that. But I want to go back 3 weeks when I told you that this would be fast-tracked, and I thought it would be done in a week. They were a little bit slow, but they have the power. They have the power to do this.
What was interesting to me about this week, too, is that the Nichols family themselves came out and said, we approve of taking their family member's name off this, Shannon. And in addition to that, we'll also give $100,000 to help towards its upkeep in the future. I thought that was an interesting gesture. Was that the deciding moment here as to why that was a unanimous decision, or did that come too late to have any influence?
No, I don't think it was the deciding factor. The commissioners have pretty much been on board with this since Chris Good went to them in the beginning of June and talked to them about it. So it was already going to be a done deal. I think it made it easier for the commissioners to vote unanimously on it, because with that support, really, who could, argue it?
Well, how about their view on the Miller Library, the Miller-Nichols Library at UMKC? Did they also say they were approving of changing that name, Steve?
No, that decision hasn't been made yet, but let me just point out that campus leadership here, including Chancellor Molly Agrawal, I should point out I teach at UMKC, he's expressed an openness to the idea of changing the name. There's a movement among students. The new president of the Student Government Association, Brandon Henderson, very much interested in seeing the name come off. I think we can expect that to happen probably also, Nick, probably the next 2 or 3 months.
So what next? Should 2 statues of America's 7th president, Andrew Jackson, be removed from outside the Jackson County courthouses in downtown Kansas City and in Independence? This week, Jackson County Executive Frank White asks the county legislature to form a special committee and begin public hearings on moving the 2 statues. One of the statues had been vandalized, and it's actually now covered in tarp. In a statement, White says Jackson was a man who owned hundreds of slaves, opposed the abolitionist movement, and caused thousands of Native Americans to die when he forced them out of their homeland for white settlement. Now, it's worth noting that White calls for them not to be destroyed, but simply moved. But to where? Are we setting up a new museum, Dave Helling, in Kansas City for the statues and monuments that are no longer wanted in the public square? Or would they be locked away in some warehouse or underground storage facility?
That remains undecided. My guess is they'll find a place to put them somewhere if they do indeed come down. As you know, there was some discussion of putting this up for a countywide vote, which I just personally think would be a bad idea. The last thing you want to do is have this kind of argument become politicized in that manner.
Should these things happen, though, without the public being involved? And I know Eric Wesson in the Jackson County legislature, certainly legislators there saying this should go to a public vote. Let the public decide this.
And that's one of the legislatures had introduced that. And I agree with Dave. If you do that, then you prolong this argument. People get on edge about it. But now do we go back and we say, well, let's change the name of the county because the county's named after him. So do we expand the conversation and say, let's name this Martin Luther King Jr. County, or do we figure out a name to change the name of the county? So this is going to be going on for a while.
Is there any active campaigns, though, Steve, to look at any other statue or monument in Kansas City? Everybody has their own ideas, of course, but is there a larger campaign going on?
I'm not hearing that, Nick. I do think there's going to be a conversation about the naming of Jackson County. I think a week ago on your show, I thought that might be a bridge too far. I'm not so sure it is anymore, particularly if the alternative is to name us Truman County. That would go over pretty well. I'm also struck by the fact, very simply, that taking the name of Nichols off the fountain, that's the easy call. The harder call is going to be, now what do you name it? That conversation is going to endure for months.
One of the extraordinary things about all of this for me has been the limited lack of at least public pushback to a lot of these changes. And we had all of those public hearings, and yes, there were a few voices, but by and large, it was almost unilaterally, we want to see these monuments changed, these statues to be changed. What would cause people to say, do you think, that this is too far, this needs to stop, it crosses the line? Shannon?
Well, I think that's a great question, because if you change the name of Jackson County, you've got Johnson County, you've got McGee Street, you've got Troost, you've got Clay County. I mean, Warnell, where does it stop? So I think that this is going to perhaps snowball and lead to other conversations about other places in Kansas City. But I think that this is going to move very slow. I agree with Dave.
What do you think about that, Eric? Where is it that we say that enough is enough, that's too far?
I think once the racial tension kind of dies down a little bit, I think right now racism and racial issues are on edge. So right now, you have a movement to where you have these things change. So I think once that kind of dies down a little bit, then it might move on to something else. But I think right now, you could probably change the name of anything. Probably change the name of the flag of the United States, because people don't want to seem like they're not being racially sensitive. So
Agreed.
no telling where it's going to go to.
While COVID-19 and the protest movement dominate the headlines, another crisis is escalating in our city, and this young boy is one of the latest visible reminders of its devastating impact. This is 4-year-old Legend Talaferro, who was shot in the face and killed while he slept in an apartment off 63rd and the Paseo. The police department lists him as the 92nd homicide in Kansas City this year.
Even during the gangs, even during the street selling the drugs, the rule has always been kids are off limits, and that rule is being broken.
His death has not stopped the violence. There have been more deaths, and they are continuing this week. We're now inching towards 100 deaths and a 40% increase on this time last year. Has anyone, though, offered up a satisfactory explanation as to why murders are rising when we are told that the pandemic may shrink the homicide rate when there are fewer people gathering in public spaces, Steve?
No, we don't have any idea. I ask that question on Up to Date all the time, Nick. Why are the numbers up? We have no idea. And that begins to speak to the difficulty in lowering the numbers, because we have no idea what's causing this. I think that remains a really big issue here. You know, I want to point out, we're going to top 100 homicides here in a few days. Mayor Lucas wanted to keep the total number of homicides for the entire year at below 100. We might be at 200 by the time this year comes to an end. And yet it's relatively quiet in terms of protests and public discussion about this, because people simply don't know what other alternatives there might be beyond local control of the police department, which I know you want to ask about.
But we're not alone, though, Eric Weston. I see them in New York City, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, all reporting large increases in their homicide rates. I think New York said they hadn't had that many shootings in the first 3 weeks of June in the last 25 years. So is what's happening here the same as what's happening across the country, or are there unique things occurring in Kansas City that we really should be paying attention to that are different?
Well, I think mental health issues are taking place all across the country. I don't think Kansas City is isolated. People's inability to resolve conflict is a major issue in the Black community.
And when you look at the main issues being discussed here when it comes to the police, Dave Howling, it's about we need to put on the ballot local control of the police. We don't want a state board running us anymore. What does that in any way do to alleviate what is a shocking homicide rate in this community?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the complete answer, Nick. It may not be even a partial answer, but it does address this problem. There is an enormous disconnect between the African-American Black community and the police department in terms of helping them and prosecutors find the people who are committing these killings and bringing them to justice. That disconnect is a big part of what's going on in Kansas City. The clearance rate is around 50%, give or take. That means you have an even chance, if you kill someone, of getting away with it in Kansas City.
Why having a local board decide that would make any difference to them?
Because the argument is that the people would then have a stake in how the department is governed. Now, it's not the answer, but it's part of addressing it, I think.
Shannon, have you heard any other fixes that are being suggested that we haven't tried before for looking at what we are seeing in terms of a 40% increase on homicides this year?
Quite frankly, I think everyone is befuddled about this. I mean, the police department has switched from going after kind of gangs of people, what they did under the Nova project, to targeting people who are the most violent in Kansas City. So they're trying that. I think people in the Black community who are trying to fix this don't know what to do anymore, because there are, marches and all sorts of things. So it really does come down to the problems that are going on there. And I think that the COVID-19 crisis doesn't help. I think the unrest doesn't help. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of mistrust. And until we can figure out how to solve that, people are going to act out like this. And I agree with Eric. We could hit 170 or 200 this year. And it's really a problem here in Kansas City. And I don't know if local control of the police department will help, because what will that look like? Will the city council put a board together? Will the mayor be the head of the police department, essentially, as the boss of the chief? What's that going to look like?
By the way, I do have other things to talk about, but I do see that the police chief this week also saying, subtly challenging the notion of local control, saying at least right now you have people from both parties who come together to control the police here because they're appointed by the governor from both parties. It would not be that way if it was under local control, Eric.
Yeah, and he's saying that. And let me just say, in the Black community, the thought is the chief is the problem. They feel like that he's not sensitive. He's not doing everything that he can to help solve homicides. And let's face it.
Okay, if you had a different police chief, would the homicide rate be going down?
You might have a better relationship between a new chief and the community, specifically the Black community, than you have with Rick Smith.
Can I just, I know we don't want to talk about local control, but to say that local control isn't the answer, what do we have with state control? We're looking at 200 murders, so it's part of the answer.
That ain't working either.
Okay,
yeah.
Steve, quickly.
Every police chief opposes local control, Nick, because you go from having 4 or 5 bosses on the board of police commissioners to 13 members of the city council and all kinds of politics. No chief has ever wanted local control, Nick.
Alrighty, how much political clout does a football team have to change decades-long policies? Kansas State University football players boycotting team activities until administrators create a policy that would allow a student to be expelled for openly racist, threatening, or disrespectful actions. The move follows a tweet by a KU student about George Floyd 4 weeks after his death under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer. The student had tweeted, "Congratulations to George Floyd on being drug-free for an entire month." 2 years ago, K-State claimed in a statement it's not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome or even offensive. Will this latest standoff with its high-profile football team force them to rethink that stand, Steve?
You know, probably not, because the university is not able legally, it appears, Nick, to expel this student, Jaden McNeil, over these tweets. But instead, what the university is trying to do is implement a whole series of mandatory diversity training, those kinds of steps to begin to move past this crisis.
Are those enough, though, to stop the boycott?
Well, we'll see. I mean, the student athletes, the football players still have decisions to make, and they may decide to up the ante a little bit. You know, it's extraordinary power that the athletes have at K-State and other schools across the country and the region, because they are threatening not to play, Nick. And that's, you know, you talk about something that gets the attention of college administrators.
And they did at the University of Missouri, Eric Wesson, when just a few years ago where there was racial unrest, the football team said, you know, also joined against the university system president, and the university system president, Tim Wolf, was gone in a matter of weeks.
Yeah. And it's just the same with this. And I think what they're doing will carry a lot more clout than we think it does. And again, I go back to my earlier comment. Right now, things are racially sensitive and on edge. So it might have an impact on what they're trying to do.
And Richard Myers, the president of K-State, says he will join the students in their protest, but not on the first protest, which is Saturday, because he's vacationing on Independence Day in Virginia. Does that hurt his case, Shannon?
There's some people who can't blame him for going away, taking a vacation, maybe spending time with his family. It's not the only thing that's going to happen at K-State. He will be engaged in things down the line. So I think that this is going to end up being pretty much of a nothing burger for him.
Just quickly, Nick, you know, just Jaden McNeil, who's behind this tweet, has been connected to white nationalist organizations. He's a provocateur. It's one person here. The distinction with Columbia over Mizzou a few years ago, you know, lots of African-American students there being called names over a period of time. That was a whole series of incidents that led to what we saw there. This deal in K-State, really keeping context here, one person behind this tweet and trying to stir things up.
But some students there, I know, will say there's been a lot behind the scenes that they've endured, and so this is just the straw that breaks the camel's back. Now, when you put a program like this together every week, you can't get to every major story hitting our headlines. What was the big metro story we missed? A fireworks-free 4th, most cities cancelling Independence Day events, and right up to the wire, Overland Park pulling the plug on its big display amid an uptick in COVID cases. Meanwhile, fireworks stands reporting explosive sales, even though most area cities still have rules that make setting off fireworks illegal. Authorities said it was a justified shooting. Now questions being asked in Overland Park over why an officer who killed an unarmed teen received a $70,000 payout to resign. They've been bashed repeatedly of late, now area police trying to win back goodwill, playing football on the plaza and hoops in OP. Expect a longer wait before heading back to the movies. Kansas City-based AMC now pushing back its reopening till the end of July. And the Royals making plans to return. While you won't be in the seats, guess who will? The team announcing they're going to place plastic cutouts of fans in the stands, and for $40, the face could be you. Alrighty, did you pick one of those stories or something completely different, Eric Wesson?
Patrick Mahomes getting Whataburger to move into the Kansas City metropolitan area. That's clout.
Oh, wow.
That's clout.
Shannon O'Brien.
The fireworks story is going to be a big story because with more people buying fireworks and doing them themselves, we always see injuries. I think that emergency rooms are going to be busy on the 4th of July.
Dave Helling.
I think that July, Nick, will be the month of schools, colleges, universities, K through 12, all deciding how they're going to react to this pandemic. Will everyone have to wear masks? Will teachers be allowed not to teach if they don't want to? Those questions remain somewhat unanswered. And the first day of classes is fast approaching, 6-7 weeks away. That's going to be a huge story this month.
Steve Kraske.
I picked the spike in the pandemic, Nick. It's a reality that none of us want to face, but it's right there with us. We've got to confront it. We've got to deal with this in a constructive way going forward, or it's only going to get worse.
And with that, we will say the week has been reviewed. Shannon O'Brien of Fox 4 News, thanks for checking in with us, along with the Cole's Eric Wesson, the Star's Dave Helling, and keeping you up to date weekdays at 9 on KCWIR-FM, Steve Kraske. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, have a great independence from the British Day, and don't forget to keep calm and carry on.